So hey guys, so let's see how we can create this functionality whereby in an input field, you can click the C password and then you can see the password. So password, and then if you click C password, you can see it. So we'll create this using HTML and CSS and JavaScript. So open any folder you'd like and then create a blank HTML document, and then you can write the exclamation mark and then press enter, and then this will generate you a boilerplate for HTML. And then from there, let's first create also a CSS file. So you can create a file called style.css, and then another one yet for JavaScript. So we call it index.js. So let's go to the HTML file, and there is an extension called live server. You can go into the extensions tab. You see this is the live server extension, and then you can enable or install this extension, and then on the bottom you can see a way for you to go live. So here on the bottom you can see go live. So do that and then let's continue. So let's start. To start with our HTML file, we are going to click the go live so that it will go live in the browser. And then what we need to do here is to start creating the input field. So I'll start with a div with the class of password, and then this one will hold the label. This one will hold the label for the input, so I can call it my input. And then here the label will be password, and then you can see it there. And then the next thing I need to create here is the input itself. So we'll just say input, and then I want the type of password, and then the name is password. So this name, we are not going to use the name here. This name applies when you are trying to submit the form. So when you submit the form, the values are submitted with the password and then the value of the password field. And then we need to add an ID here. So I'll call it ID password. And the reason we add an ID here, the ID, we can use the password as an ID. So the reason we add the IDs here is because this label points to the input. So we give the input an ID so that the label can also work. So let me just show you. So if I click here on the password, you can see the form is highlighting. But if I remove the 4, let me just show you. So if I remove the 4 and then I click the password, the input is not highlighted. So that's the reason. So that's the reason why we add the 4, because with the 4 we can highlight. Okay. Yeah. So the next thing we can do is to add a placeholder. We can add a placeholder here and say password. All right, the placeholder is there, or maybe we can add stars then to signify this is a password. The next thing I need to do is to make sure this password and the input are aligned vertically. So what I'm going to do first is to link the CSS file. So the CSS is linked, and then you can see the href points to style.css, which corresponds to our style.css. And then what I will start doing here is that there are some prerequisites when working with CSS. So we can target the body element, and then some of the prerequisites we need to do when starting the CSS. The first one is to set the margin to 0 for everything for the body, and then in our case we can add a padding of something like 2rem so that it is not on the end. And then box sizing, border box. So the box sizing border box is basically used for making sure that the paddings and the margins are inclusive when dealing with heights and widths. So if you don't add this, then there will be some issues between your elements. So you can also change the background color of this. Maybe can use that. Doesn't change too much, but it's all right. I think that still is okay. So the next thing we need to do is to target the password div so that we can align the label and the input on top of each other. So the class is password, so we can copy the class and then we can target that class right here. Then we can display them flex, and then flex direction, we want it to be column. So you can see they're on top of each other, and then I can give them a gap of maybe 5 pixels, and then that is okay. Then something else you might notice is that this form element is filling the whole page. So what I can do here is that I can create yet another div and give it a class of form. This one is what I'm going to add the width, and then since the class is form, then I can go to my CSS file, and then on top here I can target the form and then say a width. I can give it a width of like 200 pixels. Then you can see that form element is fixed to a width because the parent has the width. Then I don't need to display this right yet. Something else we need to add before we continue is the checkbox. So we have the password, and then now we need to add the checkbox. So I'm just going to do the same thing, whereby I create a div and give it a class of checkbox. And then let me start with the label, and then I can say for. We said the for helps us so that when you click on the label, then it highlights the input. So checkbox, and then the name is see my password, something like that. And then we can add the checkbox itself. So input checkbox, and then the name is checkbox. We said that this name will be used whenever you are submitting the form, whereby the name will be checkbox, and then the value will be the whether it's true or false, and then the ID. Let me just show you yet again. So if I click on the password, you can see the checkbox is not getting ticked. That's because we need to link the checkbox with the label. And to make sure that you understand is that we don't really need to use the checkbox name here. You can use any name you'd like. And then now if I click on the label, you can see the input getting highlighted. The checkbox works as expected. So the next thing we need to do is to align the checkbox with the label. We'll do the same thing we did with the password. So we just go checkbox, and then we display flex, and then you can say we can align items center. So this one we align the checkbox elements, and then we can give them a gap of 2 pixels. And something else you might notice is that commonly you don't see the label starting. We start with the checkbox. So we're just going to realign these ones so that now the checkbox is on the other side. So the next thing you might notice is the form elements are very close to each other. So we can go to the form, then we display flex here. Then flex direction, we want it to be column. And then we can add a gap of something like 1 rem. Then now you can see our form looks a bit nice. So the next thing we can do is that we might want to style this input a little bit. We don't necessarily need to, but we can style the input itself. So when you come here and see that the input has an ID of password, so we can go here and target the ID. That IDs are targeted using the hash. Now the ID is, what is the, oh yeah, the ID is password, and then we can target that. First thing I'm going to add is a border radius of something like 10 pixels. Okay, that's too much. Then we can do 5 pixels. And then we can add a padding. So padding vertical, we can do 5 pixels. And then horizontal, it's 10 pixels. Yeah, that looks a bit nice. And then, yeah, so I think you can change the background color as well. So we can say background color. Then maybe you can do that so that you can see the input as well. So we can still type on the input. Yeah. but now the functionality is not working. That's what we are going to work on using JavaScript. So let's now switch our focus to JavaScript. We have the JavaScript file, and then to just check if it's working, we can say hey. Then because we don't see the model itself, so we need to link the JavaScript to the HTML. So we come here and create a script, and then the source, we say index.js. And then as soon as we do that, you can see now the hey shows up. So let's continue. So to start with, the first thing I need to do is to get access to this input. So and then to get the access, we have methods of the DOM. So we can create a variable here and call it my input is equals to. Then we can call the document. This is all about the DOM. I created a video about the DOM, so you might want to check it out. But we are going to use a method called getElementById. And the getElementById takes in the ID you want to grab. So you can see we want to grab this element with an ID of password. So just come here and say we want to get the element with the ID of password. So we just get the reference of the element in the DOM. The next thing we need is the checkbox itself so that we can know when the checkbox is clicked. So checkbox is equals to document dot get element by ID. Let's see which ID the checkbox is using. The checkbox is using an ID of checkbox. So you come here and write the checkbox. So we have access to the checkbox. We can add an event listener to the checkbox. So an event listener basically listens for events. And the event we want here is whenever we have a change on the checkbox, we want to get alerted so that we can change something on the input. So just going to call my checkbox. This one was stored in a variable. So this corresponds to this checkbox. So this checkbox. So we can say, so what we can say here is that we can add an event listener, and the event we want to listen on, we have so many events we can listen on. We want to listen on a change event on the element. So whenever we get a change event, so we can create the function that handles that inline, or we can create it outside. So for this scenario, I'm just going to create it here. Or let me just create it here. So function handle checkbox takes an event, and then instead of writing this inline, we can now write handle checkbox there as a function. So this one basically says add an event listener on the change. Whenever you listen on the change on this element, call this function and pass the event that was created. So let's continue. So what we can do here to test out it is working, we can console log hey as well here. So we can alert hey. And if I do that, you can see that means the event is being captured as expected. So the next thing we need to do now is that we have captured the event. We will need to know whether the checkbox has been checked or not. So to know that, we're going to create a variable called checkbox. Now let me create it a checkbox value. No, because this is a Boolean value, because this one does not store text, this one stores a Boolean value. A Boolean value means true or false. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say is checked is equals to, we have a way to get whether the checkbox is checked or not using the event.target.checked. And then we can alert this. And then if we run this, you can see true, we have checked. This again, false, we have not checked. And then so after doing that, what we need to do is that we need to check if it is checked. Then if it is checked, what we need to do is to change an attribute, in the input. So what we do is we can say my input dot set an attribute. The attribute we want is the type, and then we set it to text. And then else we can say my input dot set attribute, and then the type here we set it back to password. And then that's it, guys. So if you check this, then this one works. So thank you and follow for more videos.